All right, hello and welcome back. My name is Ryan Anglin. I'm with Vision Data and Communication Services, and in this video, we're going to be talking about telephone terminology. Finally got a highlighter on my mouse, so now you'll be able to see what I'm looking at. And today, I'm in a little bit more relaxed setting, so just bear with me on that. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about two main things, which is telephone numbers and then telephones in general, and some terminology that's not maybe common sense for you to get an idea, at least, of what some of these things mean. So we're going to look at what an extension is, a DID, a DN, a mask, a shared line. When we're talking about telephone numbers, these all have different meanings. And then we're going to get into telephones, and we'll talk about a telephone's MAC address. What does that mean? And then what's a POTS line, right? So or a POTS line. So without further ado, let's get started. When we're talking about a few of these things, um, we need some things in the telephone network to help us kind of understand how we're making a call and how these terms interact with each other. So we have a telephone service, and in this case, it'll be Bell Telephone Service. It could be Verizon or AT&T, doesn't matter. Just a telephone service. We have a hospital network. All right, so a network within a hospital, so it can be two computers together, or it can be 1,000 phones and a couple switches and a router and all that stuff put together. Doesn't matter. Just a network, a hospital's network, or a business. We have an outside call. So outside meaning it's not in the hospital's network. So like if you get a call from, your grandmother from her house to the hospital, that's an outside call. Okay. Um, an analog or a POTS line or analog POTS phone, same idea. And a VoIP or a voice over IP phone. Okay, so we're going to see how these interact and how we're going to use this terminology. All right, so the first thing is an extension. This is a 4 to 6 digit number. Usually it's 5 digits, especially when we're going to the new Cisco system on a migration. Usually you'll type in just the 4 or 5 digit number into the phone, and that 4 or 5 digit number corresponds with somebody else's phone. And the hospital network actually knows that's that 4 or 5 digits and associates that other device with that number. So, for example, if I want to call Ted, and Ted has the extension 12345, I type 12345 on my phone. It goes to the hospital's network. It says, "Oh, 12345, that's Ted," and it sends the call to Ted. All right, so this is an extension. It's within a hospital's network. Okay, you only have extensions within the hospital or the business's network. If I dial 12345 on my cell phone, for example, it's not going to go anywhere, right? Because my network is connected to Verizon, which has thousands and thousands and maybe probably a billion something phones. So only when it's in the hospital's network is when you're able to use that extension. Why? Why do they use these extensions? It's just shorthand. Okay, so it just makes it easier. Instead of dialing 10 digits, 5 digits is a lot better than using the 10. All right. So for example, if we have the telephone service here and the hospital network here. All right, so we have 3 different people. We have Dr. Ted, Nurse 1, and a hallway. All right, these all have a DID, and we'll talk about DID in a second, of +1 317 837 whatever. All right, so Ted could call the hallway by just dialing 76789. So the hallway's extension is 76789. The nurse's extension is 71234, and Ted's extension is also 71234. Okay, so the nurse and Ted probably get the same call. But anyway, this is the extension, what's highlighted in yellow here. Okay, and again, it's only on the hospital's network. Has nothing to do with the telephone service. All right, DID. We're talking a direct inward dialing. Okay, keyword being inward. Okay, and then we have something called a DN, a directory number. All right. So these are very similar things, and they're almost used interchangeably. but we'll take DID for now. So DID is a separate 10-digit number. Okay, so extension we said 5, DID is 10, directed to each employee that has a phone. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you use the DID? You call the 10-digit DID number from your cell phone in New York, and it rings a phone that's 10 digits in Pennsylvania. Okay, so it's the full telephone number. This includes the telephone service. All right, so with extension, we're just using a hospital's network. With the DID, the DID goes directly to the telephone service that owns that number, and then it goes to the hospital's network and then to the phone. Okay. So why do we have DIDs? It's a 10-digit number designed specifically for that one phone. Okay, one phone. Anywhere in the world, or anywhere in the United States. All right. If you start with +1, it's anywhere in the United States. Okay. So for example, if I have a cell phone here, and I'm not in the hospital, or I'm not a part of the hospital's network, I got a cell phone, I'm calling from home. I call 1-317-837-1234. It goes to the telephone service, into the hospital's network, and then let's see who has 1, 2, 3, 4. Sharon. Okay, so we're calling Sharon. All right, so it would route through the telephone service to the network of the hospital and straight to Sharon's phone. Okay, so that's DID. The next thing we want to talk about is something called a mask. All right, mask is this number right here. Okay, at the top of your Cisco phone. Okay, so this is the number that is your caller ID number. Okay, or your mask. So it is a DID. A mask is a DID. It's a full 10-digit number. It's a number that the person receiving a call sees the caller ID for. So for example, if I'm a doctor, okay, and I call a patient, I'm a doctor. I'm pretty busy, right? I can't be taking calls all day. I want my receptionists, I want my nurses to take those calls. Okay, so I call a patient. All right, and if I call a patient, I want the ID of my phone number not to be my phone's ID, because if it is, and that patient tries to call me, it's going to go directly to my phone. It won't go to the receptionists, right? So if I'm Sharon here, right, and I'm a doctor and I'm calling Ted, my patient, to say, hey, Ted, your results came back just fine. If you have any questions, give me a call back. When I call Ted, okay, it's not going to show this 317-837-1234. If I have a mask, it's going to show 1-317-837-5000. And that 5000 usually is the main number for the hospital or the business or the clinic, whatever. So if Ted tries to call me back, it's going to go to the receptionists. It's not going to go to me. So that's why you would have a mask, is just for that reason, to utilize as a as kind of a go to this number instead of me if I call somebody. Okay. So how do we get masks on a phone? They're programmed. The masks are programmed on these Cisco phones, the 7841s, the 8851s, and they're usually at the top right corner here somewhere. So again, why do we use this? It allows an employee to hide their own DID. All right, it hides Sharon's full number and substitutes it with this 5000. Okay, when it calls out. If you call within the hospital network, like if I call Dr. Jim, it's going to show my extension of 71234. It won't have a mask. But if I call outside the hospital or outside the hospital's network, then it'll show this caller ID of 1-317-837-5000. Okay, so that's a mask. You can think of it just like a mask, right? It hides your identity. It hides your DID. Same idea. Okay, and again, the mask is at the top right. On the, this is a 7841 model. Mask is on the top right. Your DID is right there. Okay. So again, Dr. Sharon calls a cell phone number, it's going to show this as who's calling, right? And again, Sharon's number is 71234. It's not showing 1234, it's showing the mask, 5000. Why do we want that? So the patient will call the receptionists or call the main hospital and not call me because I'm busy. All right. Next thing is the shared line. So what is the shared line? It's a DID, okay, 10-digit number. It's a shared line. A shared line is an additional line on a phone, okay. And basically what this is for is you have your main number. So Sharon, the doctor, has the full DID of 1317-837-1234, right? That's Sharon. So if I call that number, it's going to go directly to Sharon's phone. All right. Sharon has an additional line, pharmacy, 1317-837-3200. Okay. So if somebody calls pharmacy, okay, it's going to ring the pharmacy and ring Sharon's phone because Sharon has another line on here, which is the pharmacy. So if I call the pharmacy for drugs, it can ring on Sharon's phone too. Does it always ring? Only if it's programmed. Okay. So the phone can be programmed to ring or flash. Okay. Some people don't want the additional line to ring. They just want it to flash so they can pick it up if they have time. But typically these are on like nurses stations, where if somebody calls one nurse station, it'll call all nurse stations, or there's like a main number for all the nurse stations, and it'll be on all the phones as an additional line. But just remember, a shared line means it's shared on another phone. So if somebody calls that line, that DID, okay, it's going to ring on all those phones that have that additional line on it. Okay. So this allows multiple employees to be called at one time. That's why we use this. Okay. And this is programmed in Cisco Call Manager. So if you have an issue with that, you can talk to the engineers, say, hey, we're missing an additional line of 1317-837-3200. Can you put that on Sharon's phone? Okay. So that's the shared line. And again, it's usually the next line down. On 7841s, you can have 4 shared lines. So you have the different buttons here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Typically, the company we work with doesn't want to have more than one shared line on a 7841 model, because if you put four lines on this phone, it's going to split the screen and it's going to look like crap. So usually they only put one additional line on 7841. It is possible to put more, but it's usually they don't do it. If you have an 8851 model, I believe you can put up to 6. It's probably more than that. I'll need to check on that, but you can put, usually the max is 3 or 4 additional lines, which is totally doable on an 8851. So just be aware of that. And again, it's under, the additional line will always be under their DID or their main line. Okay. MAC address. What is a MAC address? Okay, so this is, I believe it's Media Access Control Address. And what this is it's kind of like a serial number, okay? But a serial number for the network. It's a physical address for the device, okay? It's mainly used by really any network. Your computer has a MAC address. Your phone has a MAC address. Your router, your security camera, probably, if it's connected to the network. If it's connected to the network, it's 9 times out of 10 it's going to have a MAC address. Okay, so why do they have these MAC addresses? What are they even used for? This allows a business's network to properly identify. All right, so the network is identifying this device. How does it identify what device it is? By the MAC address. Okay, so the MAC address usually tells the brand name of what it is and what type of device, and then a special code assigned just to that device. Okay, if you want to learn more on that, just take a Google search, and you'll learn wonders about what the MAC address does. But it's a physical address tied to one device only. Okay, no other device has that address. Only one, only that device, and so it lets us identify what that device is and who it belongs to, and that's why it's so important. You can find these on the back of the 7841s, or this is an 8851. If you go down to the corner, bottom right corner, on this 8851, it's in white, but it says MAC here, and I've blown it up. This is the full MAC. Okay, and I believe the first four characters help you identify who made it. So in this case, it's Cisco. So Cisco owns the first four MACs here, or the first four characters of this MAC address. So if you see a MAC address that's 00B8, that's probably a Cisco. Is it always 00B8 for Cisco? No, it's not. They just happen to own this one as well. So it could be Cisco could also own AAB2, right? Okay, I'm going a little bit too far in depth here, but it's specific to the brand, and it's specific to that device. Okay. All right. So moving on, we're talking about this word POTS. Okay, what is a POTS line? All right, we're talking about telephones. So a POTS line is, in short, plain old telephone service. Okay, so for those who did have telephones in their house, that was a POTS line. Okay, it's connected directly to the telephone service. It is in no way, shape, or form connected to your network, or to the hospital's network. You can think of it just going directly to the telephone service. Okay, why would we need POTS lines when we already have a hospital network or any type of network? For emergencies. Okay, so if the power is cut or your network goes down, you get a virus on your network, your VoIP phones go down, right? Unless there's a survivability module already in place to bring that network back up. But these are for emergencies. POTS lines phones do look like this: the old push button telephones, and they'll usually be red or black. Some people call these Batman phones, or bat call phones, or something like that. They're mainly used for emergencies. Are all POTS lines emergency phones? No. Okay, there's other phones that can be POTS lines for non-emergencies. Sometimes there's even fax lines that are POTS lines. And how do we really even tell if it's a POTS line or something else? Usually from the PBX data. We'll talk about what PBX is in a minute. But the PBX data that we get when we're doing before we do a migration, we get PBX data, and a robocaller calls all the numbers on that PBX to see what they are, or if they answer, or whatever. And that PBX data from the legacy system will tell us what those POTS lines are. Not always, but that's usually our first way to figure out if something is a POTS line. If it is red like this, and you ask a staff member if that's an emergency phone, and it is an emergency phone, that is probably a POTS line. Okay, but you can always ask around to either Jim or the person that is taking over the migration. You can always double check with them, saying, "Hey, I found this emergency phone. Is it a POT? I think it's a POTS line. What do you think?" Right. One other thing to note: POTS lines are full 10-digit numbers, and they hook up directly to the telephone service, as I mentioned before. But they are these are DNs, okay, or DIDs, I guess is what we talked about earlier. But they're full 10-digit numbers. Okay, if you notice, it's not hooked up to the hospital's network, right? So it goes directly to the telephone service, not hooked up to the hospital's network. So if this has a 10-digit number, right, you cannot, it doesn't have an extension. So if I'm in the hospital and I'm a doctor and I want to you know, I want to call the emergency line for whatever reason. I can't, there's no extension for the emergency line. I have to call the full 10-digit DID for the POTS line. Same with anybody else outside the hospital or whatever, they have to call that full 10-digit number. Okay. One thing to note are analog lines, POTS lines. So if you ever worked in an analog wall field, typically you'll hear on those 66 or 110 blocks, analog lines and POTS lines have cross-connect wires going between those blocks that eventually go to the VG or eventually go to the PRI or whatever for the telephone service. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. But analog lines are very similar to POTS lines. The only difference is analog lines are hooked up to the hospital's network. POTS lines are hooked up to the telephone service only. Yeah. Okay, so just as a diagram here, we have analog on this side. So it goes from the telephone service to the hospital network to the analog phone. And this is kind of what an analog phone looks like. No screen. And then we have telephone service directly to the POTS line. It cuts out the hospital network. Okay. So that wraps it up for terminology, at least for telephones. Okay, so to recap, we talked about extension, right? DID and DN. Okay, those are used. DID and DN are interchangeable. Okay, DIN usually is assigned more to, or DN is usually assigned to POTS lines, and DID is more of like VoIP, but they're almost interchangeable. All right, so extension DID, mask. We talked about what mask was. Let's go back there. Right, mask. All right, to cover your to mask your own DID. We talked about shared lines. Okay, MAC addresses. All right, so specific identifiers for that device. Has nothing to do with the telephone number. It's just about that device on the network. And POTS lines. Okay. All right, so in the next video, we're going to talk about network terminology. All right, and some of the terms we use when we're working within the network, aside from the telephones. Okay, so thank you for joining and tuning in on this video, and I will see you in the next one.